The soil felt soft between my fingers as I pressed the roots of a new plant into the earth, the smell of damp grass rising with each movement. Gardening had become my sanctuary, a place where silence did not ache as much as it did inside the house. My husband had left early again, as he often did now, with nothing more than a muttered goodbye and the sound of car tires rolling down the driveway. I told myself he was working, that exhaustion explained the distance in his eyes and the clipped tone in his voice. But a part of me, a part one tried hard to bury, wondered if there was something more. Perhaps he was slipping away, not through words but through absence, until all that remained of him in our home was the faint smell of his cologne on the pillow. That morning felt like any other until I sensed movement behind me. My heart skipped before I turned. It was not my husband. It was Daniel, his old friend, the man who sometimes dropped by for a quick chat, always friendly, never intrusive. He smiled in that easy way of his, holding a pair of gloves in his hand. "Thought you might need these," he said, his voice casual, though something in it seemed warmer than usual. I accepted them with thanks, brushing dirt from my palms before our fingers touched briefly. Just skin against skin, nothing remarkable, but I felt the contact linger inside me longer than it should have. We talked about simple things, plants, the stubborn weeds at the edge of the fence, how spring always brought more work than expected. Yet beneath those harmless words, I felt an undertow pulling me toward something unspoken. He asked how I had been, and when I gave the usual polite answer, he looked at me as if he knew it wasn't the truth. His eyes stayed with mine a second longer than comfort allowed. I looked away, pretending to adjust a leaf, pretending not to notice. For years, Daniel had been there in the periphery of my life. Dinners with friends, quick waves across the street, the occasional laugh shared at some trivial story. But that day felt different. Maybe it was the way the sunlight cut through the trees, or the way my loneliness had grown heavier, pressing against the cracks in my marriage until they finally showed. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that he saw me, not as the quiet wife tending a garden, but as someone who had been waiting to be noticed. As he leaned down to help with a broken tool, our shoulders touched. It was nothing deliberate, nothing anyone else would have found remarkable, but my breath caught. I hated myself for the rush it gave me. I told myself to move away, to create distance, yet I remained where I was. In that silence, I realized how long it had been since I had felt a presence that close, one that wasn't rushed, distracted, or wrapped in duty. My husband's affection had become routine, mechanical when it came at all. This was different, and that difference scared me more than anything. Daniel rose to his feet, brushing dirt from his jeans. His smile was still easy, still casual, but his eyes carried a question he didn't voice. I didn't answer it either, but something inside me had already shifted. A boundary had been drawn in my heart, fragile and dangerous, and I was standing far too close to it. He returned the next day, carrying nothing more than a bottle of cold water and that same unhurried smile. I was kneeling among the roses, trimming back their wild stems, when his shadow stretched across the soil beside me. I told myself it was coincidence, that he had just happened to pass by, but the way he lingered made it clear he had come with purpose. We spoke again, at first about harmless things, the weather, a neighbor's new fence, the stubborn dryness of the earth, but soon the conversation slipped toward places I wasn't prepared for. He asked if I ever got tired of being alone in the garden, if I wished someone would join me in the quiet. His words were innocent enough, yet beneath them I felt a thread tugging at me, coaxing me closer to something I wasn't ready to admit. I found myself laughing more easily than I had in months. He noticed the little details, the chipped polish on my nails, the way I pushed stray hair behind my ear. They were small observations, but they landed heavy, reminders that someone was looking at me when my own husband no longer did. I told myself it was nothing, that kindness could be mistaken for intimacy, but the warmth in his gaze unsettled me. I should have asked him to leave, yet I didn't. Instead, I found excuses to keep talking. The afternoon stretched. He offered to carry a bag of soil for me, his hands brushing against mine when I tried to take it back. Neither of us moved quickly enough to break the contact. My pulse betrayed me, quickening at something so slight. I turned away, pretending to examine the flowers, but the air between us had shifted, charged with a silence far heavier than words. When I finally looked up, he was watching me, not with the idle glance of a friend but with something sharper, hungrier, though still restrained. I tried to redirect the moment, asking about his work, his family, anything that would place us back in safe territory. But even then, the conversation turned more personal than before. He admitted to feeling lonely, to wishing life had unfolded differently. His honesty drew something out of me, something I had buried under years of routine and unspoken disappointments. Without planning it, I confessed how quiet my home had become, how my husband's absence weighed heavier each day. Daniel didn't interrupt, didn't judge. He only listened, and the way he listened made me feel exposed in a way that was both terrifying and intoxicating. When the sun dipped lower, he stood close enough that I could feel the heat of his arm against mine. He rested a hand lightly on my shoulder, and for the first time in years, I did not pull away from a touch. I told myself it was innocent, just a gesture of comfort, yet the pause that followed made the truth undeniable. My chest tightened, not with fear but with a longing I hadn't felt in so long. He leaned toward me, not close enough to kiss, but near enough that his breath brushed my cheek. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, as he said, "You deserve more than silence." The words sank deeper than they should have, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. When he stepped back and walked away, the sound of his retreating footsteps felt louder than the beating of my own heart. I remained frozen, dirt on my hands, the garden suddenly strange around me. The next days blurred into a rhythm I pretended not to recognize. Each morning I told myself I would avoid him, that I would bury myself in my work and resist the temptation to linger in the garden. Yet by the time the sun rose high, I found my eyes drifting toward the fence, listening for footsteps that did not belong to my husband. And without fail, Daniel appeared, sometimes with a small tool in hand, sometimes with nothing at all except an excuse to linger. At first, it was just small talk, laughter carried lightly on the breeze. But the space between us grew smaller with every visit, the pauses longer, the glances sharper. It began one afternoon when he offered to help trim the overgrown branches at the edge of the yard. The task required both of us to steady the ladder, hands brushing, bodies close. When he climbed down, his arm brushed mine, and neither of us moved away. I remember the silence, how it rang louder than any sound, as though the world itself was holding its breath. My heart raced, and the moments stretched until it felt impossible to break. Then it passed, but the air remained thick with what was left unsaid. Our conversations grew more personal. He told me about the cracks in his own life, the empty nights, the longing for something genuine. His words mirrored the ache I carried but had never dared to confess aloud. I found myself telling him things I had hidden from everyone, even from myself. How invisible I felt, how I had become a ghost in my own marriage. His eyes did not look away, and in them I found a dangerous kind of comfort. The more I spoke, the closer we leaned, until the space between us was measured in breaths, not steps. It happened when the weather turned and rain began to fall unexpectedly, sending us rushing inside to the small shed near the garden. The air smelled of damp wood and wet soil, the sound of water beating against the roof drowning out everything else. We stood so close the warmth of his body surrounded me, and in the half-light, our eyes met with no more excuses left between us. His hand rose, hesitant but certain, and brushed my cheek. I should have pulled away. I didn't. Instead, I let the moment carry me into the gravity of his lips meeting mine. The kiss was unplanned, stolen, yet it ignited something fierce and uncontrollable. My heart pounded with both desire and terror, the thrill of being wanted battling the guilt already clawing its way inside me. When it ended, we stood in silence, breathless, knowing the line we had crossed could never be erased. I whispered that it was wrong, that we couldn't do this, but the words fell weak, betrayed by the way my body leaned toward him even as I spoke them. He touched my hand gently, a reassurance, a promise unspoken. From then on, the secrecy began. I checked my phone more often, careful of what I said to my husband. I rehearsed lies I had never thought myself capable of speaking. Every glance, every touch with Daniel grew more dangerous, but the pull only grew stronger. I knew I was walking into fire, yet I stepped forward anyway, because for the first time in years, I felt alive. The guilt was heavy, yes, but the silence of my marriage was heavier still. Nights grew heavier than days. My husband's presence at home was little more than the scrape of a chair, the rustle of papers, the faint light spilling from his study door. I had mastered the art of silence, smiling when necessary, pretending when required. Yet inside, I carried the secret weight of stolen glances and quiet touches. Each moment with Daniel left its mark, invisible but undeniable, until I could no longer tell where loyalty ended and desire began. The garden that once calmed me had become a stage for my undoing, every flower a witness to the lie I was living. It was only a matter of time before the fragile balance cracked. One evening, after days of unanswered questions and suspicious delays, my husband confronted me, not with anger, but with a weariness that startled me more than rage could have. He asked where I had been, why my phone was always tucked away, why my eyes seemed elsewhere even when I was in the same room. His words carried no accusation, just quiet resignation. I opened my mouth, but lies faltered on my tongue. For a fleeting second, I thought of confessing everything, but fear tightened my throat. I gave him fragments of excuses, weak and crumbling, and in his silence, I saw he already knew. The truth unraveled not in shouts, but in revelations. He told me he had been unfaithful too, long before I had drifted. The late nights at work, the endless distractions, they had names, faces, shadows he had chosen not to reveal until now. His voice did not shake as he admitted it. Instead, it carried a dull flatness, as if he had rehearsed the confession many times in solitude. My breath caught, stunned not just by his betrayal, but by the bitter irony of it all. We had both been reaching outside the marriage for what we could not find within it, blind to the symmetry of our own undoing. For a long moment, the room was nothing but silence. Two people bound by vows, each broken in secret, now standing exposed before each other. I searched his face for anger, for sorrow, for something I could grasp onto, but all I found was a tired recognition, as though he had expected this ending long before I had. In that instant, I understood how far we had drifted, how the garden outside had become my escape, his absence his. We were strangers who once called ourselves partners, tethered more by habit than love. Daniel's image rose in my mind, his voice, his touch, the sense of being seen. Yet even that burned differently now, shadowed by the truth I had learned. What I thought was freedom had only been another form of betrayal, not just against my husband, but against myself. The affair had awakened me, yes, but not to love, only to the realization that I had lost the core of who I once was. As my husband turned away, leaving me alone with the echo of his confession, I stepped outside into the night air. The garden lay quiet, its flowers closed, their beauty hidden in the dark. I touched the soil absent-mindedly, the earth cold and damp beneath my fingers. For the first time, I saw it not as a refuge but as a mirror of everything buried, waiting, dangerous. I thought back to that moment when Daniel walked up behind me, the way my heart had leapt, the way everything had changed. What surprised me most now was not his presence or even my husband's truth. It was the realization that in chasing what I thought was missing, I had uncovered a different emptiness altogether.